Pseudo-hauntology, How Netflix's Cecil Hotel Docuseries Freudo Marxpilled Me. Pseudo-analysis blog. In my reflections on the Netflix original adaptation Hill House and Bly Manor I wrote, if a good ghost story has ever demonstrated anything, it is that reality is much scarier than any ghost story. The patients staying at the mental ward I work at would stay up late, playing with Ouija boards, claiming they saw or heard ghosts. Meanwhile, their bones were hollowing out, their heart rates dangerously low, their skin torn up by razor blades, their throats eroded from vomiting, etc. Despite my boss's wish to take away the Ouija, I did not intervene. This was an escape for them, and a somewhat healthy one. This did not stop me, however, from quietly thinking the real horror is not the ghost, but what these people have been through, what traumas they've been subjected to, and the significance of their mental anguish. The real horror is quite mundane. This truth is again confirmed in the recent Netflix original docuseries on the Cecil Hotel. A smart, talented, young girl goes missing in a hotel with a dark past. Eerie CCTV footage is released of her last moments in an elevator where she appears to be acting strange, out of character. With such a setup, one that follows all the horror, mind-bending psychological thriller tropes to such an extent that it ends up perfectly mimicking a psychological horror thriller called Dark Water, it's no surprise that internet sleuths begin to uncover a number of bizarre connections, some of which are completely consistent with my own occultist, hyperstitional research in my own Peace Canada connections, demon machines, that border on the eerie and absurd. Just watch the documentary, I'm not going to get into them here. And it's no surprise that from this a number of supernatural and conspiratorial theories developed. Was she demonically possessed? Was it a ghost who is responsible for her strange disappearance, or murder, as it is later discovered? Or was it not a ghost but a Satan-worshipping black metal musician? Is this all part of a government-funded psyop? It appears there is a good case to be made for each, but as it turns out the answer is both much more mundane and horrifying, and much more imminent. She suffered from bipolar II, better known as manic depressive syndrome, which can have psychotic-like symptoms during the manic phases, and she was off her meds. Wait. Don't stop reading. We don't have to reify or commit to psychiatric or medical models here at all. I sure don't, and I work as a mental health professional, to extract the point. Yes, we don't have to buy into psychiatry, nor do we have to pathologize at all, to acknowledge that some people's mental states, for better or for worse, whether right or wrong, do not map as easily onto the outside world as others might. In fact, you don't even have to believe that meds are good or effective or any other mental health discourse to acknowledge this. What is clear here is that this young girl had an episode where she became disoriented and at odds with the shared world in a way that caused her to make decisions which most would consider more or less dangerous, and which likely lead to her death. She wasn't possessed, tormented by a ghost, or, despite the interesting hyperstitional resonances, a pawn in a government psyop. Well, maybe this last one. She was immanently unwell in her body. As I have written elsewhere on my own ghost sightings, the ghost was her own projected, unintegrated bodily experiences, and a symptom of our own lack of understanding. But what about the hotel's dark past? The famous serial killer known as the Night Stalker had residence in this hellhole. So many people died there. So many people committed despicable acts, etc. We can't overlook these facts. It must surely point to something otherworldly. Yes and no. Mostly no. It's interesting that people's first reaction is to ascribe some sort of supernatural, transcendental evil or spiritual malady to the hotel rather than simply acknowledge that the hotel is in not just any bad part of town, but perhaps the worst part of town in the entire country, and that the hotel had, both in order to survive and to comply with state law, significantly loosened its standards on who could stay in the hotel, and what the hotel could do to remove unruly or dangerous residents and guests. That is, inhumanist capitalist greed on the part of the owner, hiding the danger and marketing the place as safe for tourists, and humanist progressive legislation on the part of the state, laws preventing the eviction of unruly, often criminal guests, lead to a collision of naive, middle and upper class people and desperate, zero-sum lower class people, a perfect storm of sexualized murder and libidinal torture on a grand scale, hardened super predators, in a non-pejorative sense, and hapless prey. In short, it's not ethereal demonic forces at play in the building and person, but economic and psychological ones. Or rather, the real demonic forces in the world are economic and psychological ones, material bodies and their incorporeal aspects, collective and individual maladies of bodies, not abstract spiritual sicknesses. This is whether the paranoid conspiratorial thinking gets it half right. It correctly attributes significance to the building, the structure and the space it occupies and the way it brings varied people together into that shared space. It goes wrong is when it avoids the inhuman forces of harsh reality that create these situations, and displaces any real, meaningful understanding of the girl's death, the hotel, the history of violence into the mystical, paranoid, religious realm, thereby, in a strange twist of irony, making the detectives and their methodologies of investigating, critiquing evidence, and following material clues to their end the ones most in touch with the materialist and scientific realities of classes and society. In other words, if here's a reductive bullet point to extract from Marx and all the derivatives projects is that we gloss over real material conflicts and instead substitute grand theoretical abstractions. To harken back to my opening statement about the horror of reality and the mental patients, as a therapist I see this glossing over reality in favor of abstract theory every day on the ward and in my outpatient private practice. People concoct the most interesting fantasies to explain away why these things keep happening to them, why they keep getting themselves in the same situations, and they wonder aloud about the answer when the answer is always so clear, and they make no inclination of wanting an answer from me. For example, take the vignette I mentioned in my entry 28 of my psychoanalysis blog. Patient: I keep putting in job applications and not getting calls back. I bet they. Patient devolves into a paranoid theory of how the job hirers must be hiring people with money or connections over him, etc. Me: have you tried calling back? Patient: no, I haven't. Me: if you'd like to test your theory that you are being neglected due to not having connections or money, then you might want to try calling back and seeing if you can't get an interview. Similarly, later in the session, all my friends are successful in job field. I'm in the same field and I can't seem to be as successful as them. It must be because patient devolves into a paranoid theory of how and why these people have achieved success, etc. Me: have you tried asking them what makes them successful instead of theorizing to me about it? You have these people as a resource. They are your friends. They will answer you. Why not ask them? It's important to note that I have been working with this fellow for 4 years and we have a good rapport which allows me to be this forward, and it's time he challenge his own fantasies and do something if he wants more out of his life. It's time to face reality, test your theory, talk to people who aren't just ideas in your head, and face the fact that, not unlike Occam's razor, it is often the simple mundane reasons not the complex ones that explain why things happen. Doctor, whether it's ghosts and conspiracies around a murder, or not receiving a call back for a job, the truth of reality is painful and mundane. It's much easier to turn to fantasy, see The Capitalist Unconscious, Marx and Lacan by Samo Tomczyk, who documents the link between the thought structure of Lacanian psychoanalysis and Marxism. This is why horror set in the realm of realism, what is often Lovecraftian, is so effective. A detective or someone in a similar role, not unlike the cops in the Cecil Docuseries, must uncover an ever-deepening plot, following a string of grisly clues that leads them deeper into a harsh reality. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, a node to Lovecraft, follows this trope, along with the video game Call of Cthulhu. More generally, it can be seen in films such as Jacob's Ladder, The Shining, or the creepy homeless guy who consumes the puzzle box at the end of Hellraiser. Or, in slightly different flavors, in Texas Chainsaw Massacre or House of 1000 Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, or Hostel, where the tone of cultural transgression, the naive city folk or tourists, not unlike the young girl who went to Cecil Hotel, overstepping or misunderstanding the country cultural norms, permeates the film and sets the stage for our cast of characters to be punished through slaughter for their thoughtless deeds. We this again in its more refined, high-culture art house form in Arasta's recent films Hereditary and Midsommar, the latter of which shares the cultural transgression trope, in which, not unlike The Shining, the most horrific moments of Asta's films are the breakdown in group social dynamics that lead to very real, traumatic violent ruptures in otherwise smooth, trance-like experiences. Family or friends act in ways that unsettle us or unground us, distort our common reference points, lead to horrific accidents, or suicides. For Asta, not unlike the point I made above, and at the start, that which is most horrific is that which is most real and also most mundane, that which ruptures our sense of continuity, mental and somatic traumas. The trauma of the real. Paranoia brings manic libidinal energy. But manic libidinal energy needs to be reined in by scientific method. This is what is attempted, and often failed, with scientific socialism or scientific materialism. It is also, as Tom Sick writes in his work, the connection between psychotherapy and social activism, helping people have access to the real in a way that the real informs their collective behaviors.